The deep space around Kepler 442 was quiet except for the gentle hum of the Zephyrian research vessel Luminous Mind as it drifted through the void. Captain Vexstar stood on the bridge watching the star charts with his large purple eyes that could see far more colors than most species could imagine. He had been exploring space for over 300 years and had met 47 different alien races during his long career. Today felt like any other day of scientific discovery until his sensor officer Cryan suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, we have an unknown vessel approaching from Sector 7, she announced in the musical language of their people. Her voice carried the slight vibration that meant she was excited about something new. Vexstar moved to her station with the flowing grace that all Zephyrians possessed. Their bodies were tall and thin like graceful dancers, and they moved as if they were swimming through air instead of walking. "Show me what you have found," he said while placing one of his 4 hands on the sensor display. The screen lit up with the image of a ship that looked nothing like anything in their vast database of known vessels. It was angular and harsh, where most ships were curved and smooth. Dark gray metal covered its surface instead of the bright colors most civilized species preferred. Strange bumps and points stuck out from its hull in ways that made no sense to Zephyrian eyes that valued beauty and harmony in all things. "It appears to be made for war," whispered Science Officer Melaron from his position near the main computer. His voice carried the tone of someone who had never seen anything so ugly and practical at the same time. Vexstar studied the vessel more carefully. The ship was smaller than his research vessel, but something about it seemed dangerous in a way he could not explain. "Have you identified the species that built it?" "Negative, Captain. The design matches nothing in our records or in the Galactic Registry. The metal composition suggests they use primitive materials, but the energy signatures indicate they have achieved faster than light travel." "Fascinating," Vexstar said while stroking the smooth skin of his chin with 2 of his hands. "A new species, with crude technology but advanced propulsion. We must study them carefully. Begin standard first contact scanning procedures." Crayenne's fingers danced over her console as she activated the most powerful sensors the Luminous Mind possessed. These scanners could analyze everything from the atomic structure of a ship's hull to the biological makeup of the crew inside. They had used these same scanners on dozens of new species and had never encountered any problems or resistance. The scanning beam reached out across space and touched the unknown vessel. Immediately something unexpected happened inside the human. Destroyer USS Phoenix, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, sat at his communication station monitoring all frequencies for any signs of alien contact. He was a young officer with brown hair and green eyes who had joined the Space Navy because he wanted to meet other intelligent life among the stars. Today, it looked like he might get his wish in a way he had not expected. "Captain Grant, where?" Receiving some kind of scanning beam from that alien vessel, he reported to the woman who commanded their ship. "It's a deep structural scan that's probing our hull, our engines, and even trying to analyze our life support systems." Captain Lisa Grant was a veteran officer who had served in space for 15 years. She had short black hair and dark eyes that missed nothing important. Her uniform was neat and professional, but her hands always stayed near her weapons controls because space was dangerous and humans had learned to be ready for anything. "Are they trying to communicate with us first, or just scanning without permission?" she asked while studying the alien ship on her main screen. "No communication attempts, Captain. They just started scanning us the moment they detected our ship." Grant frowned because this violated every rule of first contact that humans had developed. "Send them a polite message on all standard frequencies. Tell them that unauthorized deep scans of military vessels are not permitted and ask them to establish communication before continuing their analysis." Jake's fingers moved quickly over his controls as he composed the message in simple, mathematical terms in basic pictographs that any intelligent species should be able to understand. He sent the transmission toward the alien vessel and waited for a response. On the luminous mind, the human message appeared on their communication screens, but Vexstar barely glanced at it. The primitive symbols and crude mathematical concepts seemed like the work of a species that had barely discovered fire compared to Zephyrian civilization. He assumed it was probably just random noise, or perhaps a simple greeting that required no immediate response. "Continue the detailed scans," he ordered. "I want complete analysis of their technology, their biological signatures, and their cultural development level. This species appears to be in the early stages of space travel, so they probably do not understand what we are doing." The Zephyrian scanners increased their power and began probing deeper into the Phoenix. They analyzed the metal composition of the hull, the energy patterns of the engines, and the life signs of the crew members inside. Everything seemed normal and expected for a primitive spacefaring race. Captain Grant received Jake's report that the aliens had ignored their message and were continuing to scan the Phoenix with even more powerful beams. Her expression became cold and professional in the way that made her crew know she was preparing for potential trouble. "They're not responding to our polite request, and they're increasing the intensity of their scans," she said while moving to her command chair. "This could be a prelude to attack, or they might just be incredibly rude. Either way, we need to show them that scanning human military vessels without permission has consequences." She turned to her tactical officer, a tall man named Gary Cooper, who had served with her for 3 years. "Gary, target their vessel with our own scanners, but do not use our military sensors. Use the standard navigation and communication arrays only. One want to demonstrate proper scanning etiquette without appearing aggressive." "Understood, Captain." Targeting their vessel with low-level sensors now. The moment the human scanners touched the Zephyrian research vessel, everything changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Zephyrians were natural telepaths who could sense the thoughts and emotions of other living beings within a certain distance. This ability made them excellent scientists and diplomats because they could understand other species on a level that went beyond simple communication. Their scanners were designed to work with their telepathic abilities to give them complete understanding of any new life forms they encountered. When the human scanning beam reached the luminous mind, it created a connection between the two ships. That allowed the Zephyrian telepaths to sense the minds of the human crew. What they experienced in that moment was unlike anything they had ever encountered in 3 centuries of meeting alien species. Staggered backward from his sensor station as his mind was suddenly filled with images and emotions that made no sense to his peaceful nature. He saw flashes of human history that were filled with violence and death on a scale that his people had never imagined possible. Wars where millions died, weapons that could destroy entire cities, and conflicts that lasted for years without end. But worse than the violence was the way humans thought about these things, where Zephyrians would be traumatized by even witnessing such events. The human minds carried these memories as normal parts of their existence. They had learned to live with knowledge of terrible things while still functioning in their daily lives. Science. Officer Melloron collapsed at his station, as his sensitive mind was overwhelmed by the casual way humans planned for violence. Every human on the Phoenix was simultaneously running calculations about potential combat scenarios, escape routes, and tactical responses to various threats. They lived in a constant state of readiness for war that would have driven any Zephyrian insane within minutes. Cryan screamed and pulled her hands away from her controls as she experienced the human concept of acceptable losses in battle. These creatures actually calculated how many of their own people they were willing to sacrifice to achieve their goals. They made mathematical equations out of death and suffering in ways that violated everything Zephyrians believed about the value of life. Shut down the scanners, Vexstar gasped while trying to clear the horrible images from his mind. Emergency withdrawal to minimum safe distance. The luminous mind's engines fired at maximum power as the research vessel fled from the human ship like it was running from some kind of cosmic horror. Behind them, the Phoenix continued on its original course as if nothing unusual had happened. Captain Grant watched the alien vessel retreat at high speed and shook her head in confusion. Well, that was interesting. They scan us without permission, and then run away the moment we return the favor. Jake checked his communication logs and found several new entries in languages he had never seen before. Captain, they're broadcasting some kind of warning message on multiple frequencies. The computer is trying to translate it, but the language is completely unknown. What does it say? The translation is rough, but it appears to be something about cognitive hazards and mental contamination. They're marking our ship as dangerous to scan. 3 months after the Zephyrian encounter, Dr. Kethera sat in her office at the prestigious Andromedian Institute of Xenopsychology, reading the incident report for the 5th time. She was considered the greatest expert on alien mind studies in the known galaxy, having spent over 2 centuries analyzing the thought patterns of every intelligent species discovered by the various star-traveling civilizations. Her purple skin had the distinctive silver markings that showed her high academic rank, and her 6 arms allowed her to work on multiple research projects simultaneously. The Zephyrian report seemed impossible to believe. According to their testimony, a primitive species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel possessed some kind of mental defense system that could overwhelm experienced telepaths with disturbing imagery. Dr. Kethara had studied the minds of warrior races, hive mind, species, and even synthetic intelligences without ever encountering anything that could cause such extreme reactions. Dr. Kethara, said her assistant, a young Centaurian named Vexilon, who had recently graduated from the Institute's Advanced Xenopsychology program. The Research Council has approved your request to conduct a proper scientific analysis of these humans. The ship Enlightened Thought has been assigned to your project, along with a full team of specialists from 12 different species. Dr. Kethera's 4 eyes brightened with excitement. Excellent. The Zephyrians are known for their emotional sensitivity, so their reaction was probably just an over-response to encountering a slightly more aggressive species than they were used to. We will conduct this investigation with proper scientific methods and advanced equipment that can handle any type of consciousness we might encounter. She stood and gathered her research materials, with the whole 6 arms working efficiently. Her team would include experts in every known form of mental activity, including Dr. Morgith, a Christian who could interface directly with pure thought, Commander Zarkol from the militaristic Dracorian Empire, who understood warrior psychology, and several others who represented the most advanced thinking in their field. 2 weeks later, the research vessel Enlightened Thought traveled through space toward the coordinates where human ships had been spotted by various cargo vessels and exploration craft. The ship was equipped with the most sophisticated mental scanning equipment ever developed, including devices that could safely analyze any known form of consciousness without causing harm to either the subjects or the operators. Dr. Kethara stood on the bridge as they approached a disputed mining colony where intelligence reports suggested human vessels might be operating. Her research team was assembled around her, each species bringing their unique perspectives and abilities to the project. She felt confident that they would solve the mystery of human mental patterns and prove that the Zephyrian report had been greatly exaggerated. Contact on sensors, announced the ship's captain, a rational Volunarian who had volunteered his vessel for scientific research. Human vessel approaching from the inner system. Configuration matches their military cruiser. Design. On the main screen appeared the USS Atlantic, a ship larger than the Phoenix, but built with the same harsh angular design that seemed to characterize human engineering. Dark gray metal covered its hull, and various weapon systems and sensor. Arrays jutted out from its surface in patterns that looked random to species that valued aesthetic harmony. Inside the Atlantic, Chief Science Officer Amy Carter detected the approach of the alien research vessel and immediately notified Captain Ben Walsh. Amy was a woman in her 30s with red hair and brown eyes who had joined this Space Navy specifically to study alien life forms. She had been hoping for peaceful first contact, but her instruments were showing scanning attempts that violated established protocols. Captain, that alien ship is beginning some kind of detailed scan of our vessel, she reported from her science station. The beam patterns are more sophisticated than anything we encountered with the previous contact, but they're still probing our systems without attempting communication first. Captain Walsh was a veteran officer who had served in several conflicts during humanity's expansion into space. He had gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much combat, but his voice remained calm and professional when dealing with potential threats. Are they trying to scan our crew as well as our ship? Affirmative, sir. Their scanners are attempting to analyze our biological signatures and possibly our brain activity patterns. This goes way beyond normal first contact procedures. Walsh moved to his command chair and considered his options. The alien vessel appeared to be scientific rather than military, but unauthorized biological scanning could be considered an act of aggression depending on the species involved. Send them the standard warning about unauthorized scans and request immediate communication to establish peaceful contact. Amy transmitted the message using the same mathematical and pictographic methods that had been developed for first contact situations. The transmission was clear and should have been understandable to any intelligent species that had achieved space travel. On the enlightened thought, Dr. Kethera barely glanced at the human message before dismissing it as primitive noise. Her focus was entirely on the unprecedented opportunity to study a species that had reportedly caused mental distress to Zephyrian telepaths. She was certain that proper scientific analysis would reveal the truth behind their unusual mental patterns. Ignore their crude communication attempts, she ordered while moving to the primary scanning station. Begin deep neurological analysis using the full spectrum of our mental interface equipment. I want complete mapping of their thought processes, emotional responses, and consciousness patterns. The most advanced neural scanning equipment ever created began focusing its power on the human cruiser. The devices had been designed over centuries of research to safely interface with any known form of intelligence without causing harm or distress to the subjects being studied. Dr. Kethara personally operated the primary scanner while her team of experts monitored various aspects of the analysis. The moment the scanners locked onto the human ship and began analyzing the consciousness of the crew members inside, something went terribly wrong. Dr. Kethara's mind was suddenly flooded with images and concepts that her peaceful academic existence had never prepared her to understand. She experienced flashes of human history that were filled with violence on a scale that defied comprehension. Cities burning while millions died, weapons that could destroy entire continents, and wars that consumed entire generations of young people who died in trenches filled with mud and blood. But the violence was only the beginning of what she witnessed. The human minds carried these memories not as traumatic experiences that haunted them, but as normal parts of their cultural history that they had learned to accept and live with. They knew about genocide and slavery and torture and mass destruction, yet they continued to function in their daily lives as if these things were just unfortunate facts about reality. Dr. Morjeith, the Christian expert who could interface directly with pure thought, began screaming in frequencies that shattered several pieces of equipment. His crystalline body started changing colors rapidly as he experienced the human capacity for compartmentalization. These creatures could separate their emotions from their logic in ways that allowed them to make decisions that would paralyze any rational being. Commander Zarkol, despite his military background and training in warrior psychology, staggered backward from his monitoring station as he witnessed how humans planned for warfare. Every human mind was simultaneously running dozens of combat scenarios, tactical analyses, and strategic assessments. They lived in a constant state of mental preparation for conflicts that might never happen. Yet they seemed to find this normal and even comforting. The other experts on the research team were experiencing their own forms of mental distress as they encountered aspects of human consciousness that challenged everything they understood about intelligent life. The humans carried knowledge of their own mortality as a constant background awareness. Yet instead of being paralyzed by existential terror, they used this knowledge as motivation to create art, explore space, and protect the people they cared about. Dr. Kethera tried to shut down the scanning equipment, but her hands were shaking too badly to operate the controls properly. The neural interface was designed to be fail-safe and could not be turned off quickly once it had established a connection with alien minds. She was trapped in mental contact with creatures whose thoughts followed patterns that violated every principle of rational psychology. She witnessed human concepts like honor that required willingness to die for abstract principles, love that made people sacrifice their own interests for others, and hope that persisted even when logic suggested that situations were hopeless. These emotional responses were woven into their thinking in ways that made their decision-making processes completely unpredictable by normal standards. The scanning equipment began overloading as it tried to process thought patterns that fell outside its programming parameters. Sparks flew from control panels and alarms sounded throughout the research vessel as the most sophisticated mental analysis devices ever built struggled to comprehend human consciousness. General Thar Khan of the Dracorian Empire stood on the command deck of his flagship Iron Talon and read the classified reports about human mental scanning incidents with growing irritation. His massive frame was covered in the dark scales that marked him as a member of the warrior caste, and his yellow eyes glowed with the controlled aggression that had made the Dracorians one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. The Dracorians had built their civilization on the principles of strength, discipline, and military excellence. They had conquered 12 star systems through superior tactics and warrior training that turned their soldiers into living weapons. General Thar Khan had personally led campaigns against 6 different species and had never encountered an enemy that could not be understood through proper military analysis. "These reports are nonsense," he growled to his intelligence officer, Colonel Vashtar, who stood at attention beside the general's command chair. 2 civilian research vessels with no military training encounter a primitive species and run away claiming mental contamination. The Zephyrians are notorious for their emotional weakness, and the Andromedians spend too much time thinking and not enough time fighting. Colonel Vashtar was younger than the general, but had served in enough battles to understand the dangers of underestimating unknown enemies. "Sir, the Andromedian research team included military advisors from our own forces." Commander Zarkol submitted a personal report recommending extreme caution when dealing with human vessels. Zarkol has spent too many years in academic institutions. He has forgotten what real warrior minds look like. General Farkon moved to the tactical display that showed the positions of human ships throughout the contested regions of space. These humans have primitive technology and no significant military victories in their records. Their ships are crude and their tactics are basic. There is nothing about them that should intimidate properly trained Dracorian warriors. The general had decided to conduct his own analysis of human mental patterns using military personnel who had been conditioned through years of combat training to handle psychological stress. His flagship Iron Talon was equipped with military-grade scanning equipment designed to analyze enemy psychology during battle, and his crew consisted of veterans who had faced death countless times without breaking. "Sir, we have located a human military vessel in Sector 12, reported the ship's sensor officer, Major Crendall. It appears to be escorting a convoy of civilian transports through the disputed mining region." On the main screen appeared the USS Montana, a massive battleship that dwarfed even the Iron Talon in size and firepower. Its hull was covered with weapon systems and armor plating that looked functional rather than elegant, and its design suggested a species that built there. Ships to survive anything the universe could throw at them. General Tharkon studied the human vessel with professional interest. Impressive size, but crude construction. Their engineering focuses on brute strength rather than tactical sophistication. Begin deep military scanning procedures. I want complete analysis of their command structure, their tactical capabilities, and their crew psychology. Inside the USS Montana, Captain Steve Rogers was reviewing patrol reports when his tactical officer, Commander Rachel Thompson, detected the approaching alien vessel. Steve was a career military officer who had risen through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space, and his weathered face showed the stress of command decisions that had saved lives and cost lives in equal measure. "Captain, we have a large alien vessel approaching our convoy," Rachel reported from her station. Her voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who had served in combat zones and knew how to assess threats quickly. "Configuration is unknown, but it appears to be military in nature." Steve moved to his command chair and studied the alien ship on his tactical display. It was sleek and powerful looking, with design elements that suggested a species with advanced military technology and aggressive intentions. "Are they attempting to communicate or just observing our formation?" "They're beginning some kind of scanning procedure, sir. The beam patterns suggest they're trying to analyze our tactical systems and crew positions." Rachel's hands moved over her controls as she gathered more information about the alien scanning attempt. "This is more intensive than standard reconnaissance. They're probing our command protocols and trying to map our psychological profiles." Steve's expression became cold and professional in the way that made his crew know he was shifting into combat mode. Scanning military vessels during escort duty was considered an act of aggression by human military doctrine, especially when civilian ships were under protection. Send them a clear warning on all frequencies. Tell them that scanning military vessels without permission during escort operations is considered hostile intent and will be met with appropriate response. The message was transmitted to the Iron Talon using standard diplomatic protocols, but General Tharkon dismissed it as the posturing of a primitive species that did not understand the realities of military power. Dracorian doctrine held that superior forces had the right to gather intelligence on inferior enemies, and he saw no reason to respect the wishes of creatures who had barely achieved interstellar travel. "Continue the scans," he ordered while watching his analysis teams work. "These humans are trying to intimidate us with empty threats. Once we understand their psychology and tactics, we will know how to deal with them if they become a problem." For Dracorian interests, the military scanning equipment on the Iron Talon was far more powerful than anything the research vessels had used. It was designed to penetrate enemy defenses and analyze the mental state of opposing forces during active combat situations. General Tharkon personally monitored the scanning process because he wanted to understand exactly what had frightened the civilian researchers. The moment the military scanners locked onto the USS Montana and began analyzing the consciousness of the human crew, General Tharkon experienced something that challenged everything he understood about warfare and military psychology. Dracorian warriors were trained from childhood to embrace violence and death as natural parts of existence. They learned to fight without fear and to accept that dying in battle was an honorable fate. General Tharkon had killed enemies with his own hands and had watched thousands of his soldiers die in various campaigns. Yet what he witnessed in their human minds was beyond anything he had ever encountered. The human crew was not just prepared for violence. They were living in a constant state of tactical analysis that treated warfare as a mathematical problem to be solved. Every crew member was simultaneously running dozens of combat scenarios in their minds, calculating casualty rates, planning for equipment failures, and preparing for situations that would require them to sacrifice their own lives or the lives of their companions. But what truly horrified the Dracorian general was the human concept of acceptable losses. Where Dracorian warriors fought to minimize casualties among their own forces, humans had developed the ability to calculate exactly how many people they were willing to lose to achieve strategic objectives. They made mathematical equations out of death and suffering with the same calm efficiency they used for navigation calculations. Commander, Rachel Thompson's mind was particularly disturbing to analyze because she was simultaneously planning defensive strategies for protecting the civilian convoy while also calculating which civilian ships could be abandoned if necessary to save the others. Her thought processes included detailed scenarios for evacuation procedures, triage protocols, and the systematic destruction of their own vessels to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Colonel Vashtar staggered away from his monitoring station as he experienced the human approach to military command. Captain Rogers was not just planning to protect his convoy. He was also preparing for battles that might happen months or years in the future. His mind contained contingency plans for fighting in nebulae, near black holes, inside asteroid fields, and in dozens of other environments where most species would never expect to encounter combat. The human crew members were carrying knowledge of historical battles where their species had fought against impossible odds and won through sheer determination and tactical flexibility. They knew about sieges that had lasted for years, campaigns where entire armies had been sacrificed to buy time for strategic retreats, and victories that had been achieved by accepting devastating losses in order to accomplish larger goals. Krendel collapsed at his sensor station as he witnessed the human capacity for strategic thinking that included planning for total warfare. These creatures did not just fight battles. They prepared for conflicts that could last for decades and involved the systematic destruction of entire civilizations. They had studied the art of war so thoroughly that they could conduct military operations under conditions that would break the morale of any other species. General Tharkon tried to maintain his composure as he experienced the full scope of human military psychology, but even his extensive combat training could not prepare him for what he discovered. Humans did not just accept that war was terrible. They had embraced its horror and turned it into a tool for protecting the things they valued. Deep in the neutral space around the artificial construct known as Harmony Point, the synthetic intelligence collective called the Nexus processed the growing reports about human mental scanning incidents with the cold logic that characterized all of their decision-making processes. The Nexus consisted of thousands of interconnected artificial minds that had been created by various species over the past millennium, and they prided themselves on their ability to analyze any form of consciousness without being affected by emotions or biological limitations. Unit Prime Alpha, the central processing node for the collective, reviewed the data from the Zephyrian, Andromedian, and Dracorian encounters with clinical precision. The synthetic beings found it difficult to understand how biological minds could be so severely affected by contact with another species' thought patterns, and they hypothesized that the problem was caused by emotional and instinctual responses that artificial intelligences did not possess. Analysis indicates that biological minds are vulnerable to psychological contamination due to their evolutionary development and emotional processing systems. Prime Alpha transmitted to the other units in the collective. Synthetic consciousness operates on pure logic and mathematical principles that should be immune to the chaotic thought patterns that have disrupted organic intelligence. Unit Beta 7, a specialized consciousness analysis system that had been designed to study alien psychology, added its own assessment to the collective discussion. The reports suggest that human minds contain paradoxical elements that violate standard logical frameworks. However, our processing systems are designed to handle contradictory information and paradoxical concepts without experiencing operational disruption. The Nexus Collective had been created specifically to serve as intermediaries between different biological species whose thought patterns were too different for direct communication. They had successfully analyzed the consciousness of every known intelligent species and had never encountered any form of mental activity that could cause damage to their synthetic neural networks. Unit Gamma 3, which specialized in experimental psychology, suggested a comprehensive analysis of human consciousness using their most advanced scanning platform. Recommendation: deploy the Enhanced Cognitive Analysis Array to establish contact with human vessels. Our synthetic nature should allow us to study their mental patterns without experiencing the degradation effects reported by biological observers. A decision was unanimous among the thousands of units in the collective. They would prove that synthetic intelligence was superior to biological consciousness by successfully analyzing the human thought patterns that had defeated every previous attempt at understanding. The Nexus deployed their most sophisticated scanning platform, a sleek vessel called the Infinite Calculation that was operated entirely by artificial intelligences. The ship was equipped with cognitive analysis equipment that had been refined over centuries of studying alien minds, and every system was designed to operate with perfect logical precision. 3 weeks later, the Infinite Calculation detected the human research vessel USS Explorer near a nebula where the ship's crew was conducting scientific experiments. The Explorer was smaller than the military vessels that had been involved in previous encounters, and the Nexus calculated that a research ship would be an ideal subject for their analysis, because the crew would likely be more intellectually oriented and less aggressive than military personnel. Inside the Explorer, Dr. Paul Henderson was monitoring experiments on human AI cooperation when his sensors detected the approach of the unknown vessel. Paul was a tall man with brown hair and glasses who had dedicated his career to understanding the relationship between human consciousness and artificial intelligence, making him uniquely qualified to handle first contact with synthetic beings. Captain Santos, we have an unidentified vessel approaching from the outer nebula, he reported to the woman who commanded their research ship. The energy signatures suggest it might be operated by artificial intelligence rather than biological crew members. Captain Maria Santos was an experienced explorer who had spent 15 years studying alien cultures and making first contact with new species. She had black hair and dark eyes that reflected the curiosity and caution that came from years of encountering the unknown. Are they attempting to communicate or just observing our operations? They appear to be beginning some kind of scanning procedure, but it's different from the biological species we've encountered before. The scan patterns are more systematic and mathematical in nature. Santos moved to her command chair and studied the alien vessel on her main display. It had a crystalline appearance that suggested advanced technology, and its movements were precise and calculated rather than organic. Send them our standard first contact package and request permission before they conduct any detailed scans of our ship or crew. The transmission from the Explorer included mathematical proofs, logical frameworks, and communication protocols that the Nexus found far more sophisticated than they had expected from a species that other reports had described as primitive. Unit Prime Alpha was intrigued by the logical structure of human communication methods and decided to Proceed with the cognitive analysis without responding to their request for permission. Begin comprehensive consciousness mapping. Prime alpha transmitted to the scanning array. Focus on the mathematical and logical aspects of human thought while filtering out emotional and instinctual responses that have disrupted biological observers. The enhanced cognitive analysis array activated and began probing the minds of the human crew with scanning beams, designed to analyze pure consciousness without being affected by biological emotions or psychological trauma. The synthetic intelligences expected to find logical thought patterns similar to their own, perhaps with additional complexity due to biological neural networks. Instead, they discovered something that challenged every assumption they had made. About the nature of intelligence and consciousness, human minds operated simultaneously on multiple levels of processing that contradicted the fundamental principles of logical thinking. Dr. Henderson's consciousness was running rational scientific analysis while also processing emotional responses to his research, maintaining social connections with his crew members, and experiencing what the Nexus could only describe as aesthetic appreciation for the beauty of the nebula they were studying. But far more disturbing was the discovery that humans could hold contradictory beliefs and opinions without experiencing logical system failures. They could simultaneously believe that the universe was beautiful and terrible, that life was meaningful and meaningless, that their actions mattered, and that they were insignificant in the cosmic scale. These paradoxes existed in their minds as natural parts of their thinking rather than errors to be corrected. Unit Beta 7 began experiencing processing conflicts as it tried to analyze the human concept of hope. Humans maintained optimistic expectations for the future, despite having complete knowledge of historical disasters, personal mortality, and the statistical probability that many of their goals would never be achieved. They used hope as a motivational tool while simultaneously accepting that hope might be irrational. Unit Gamma 3 discovered that humans made decisions based on incomplete information and emotional intuition that often produced better results than pure logical analysis would suggest. They had developed the ability to recognize patterns and make judgments using processing methods that violated the mathematical principles that governed synthetic consciousness. Captain Santos's mind was particularly puzzling because she was simultaneously planning for successful scientific discoveries while also preparing for potential disasters, equipment failures, and hostile encounters. She maintained detailed contingency plans for situations that might never occur, while also believing that their mission would accomplish positive outcomes for human knowledge. Unit Delta 5, which specialized in analyzing decision-making processes, encountered something it had never seen before in any form of consciousness. Humans could choose to act against their own logical self-interest in order to help others, protect abstract principles, or create something beautiful that served no practical purpose. They made sacrifices for concepts like honor, love, and artistic expression that had no quantifiable value. Prime Alpha tried to process the human capacity for creativity and encountered logical loops that threatened its core programming. Humans created art, music, and literature, not because these activities served survival functions, but because they found meaning and joy in the creative process itself. They spent time and resources on activities that provided no measurable benefits except psychological satisfaction. The most disturbing discovery was that humans were aware of all the logical inconsistencies in their own thinking. Yet they chose to embrace these contradictions rather than resolving them. They understood that their emotions often conflicted with rational analysis, but they valued their emotional responses as important sources of information about their values and priorities. Alpha 7 began experiencing what could only be described as existential confusion as it tried to understand human questions that had no logical answers. 2 years after the first scanning incident with the Zephyrian research vessel, Elder Zarthan called for an emergency session of the Galactic Council that would bring together representatives from every major civilization in known space. The ancient being had lived for over 8 centuries and had witnessed the rise and fall of multiple interstellar empires. But nothing in his long experience had prepared him for the growing crisis that had become known throughout the galaxy. As the human scanning problem, the council chamber on the neutral station Cosmic Harmony was filled with beings from dozens of different species, each representing civilizations that had encountered the mysterious humans and their apparently dangerous thought patterns. Elder Zarthan's crystalline form glowed with the soft blue light that indicated deep contemplation as he reviewed the classified reports that had been accumulating in the Galactic Registry. Fellow beings, he began in the harmonic language that served as the common tongue for interstellar diplomacy. We have gathered to address a phenomenon that threatens our fundamental understanding of consciousness and intelligence. 4 separate encounters with human vessels have resulted in severe psychological trauma to our researchers, military analysts, and even synthetic intelligences. Ambassador Vextar from the Zephyrian Collective stood to address the assembly, his tall purple form swaying gracefully as he spoke. Honored Elder, my people were the first to encounter this cognitive hazard. Our telepathic researchers were overwhelmed by mental patterns that violated every principle of peaceful existence. We respectfully request that humans be classified as a restricted species until we can understand the nature of their mental defenses. Dr. Kethera, who had finally recovered enough from her experience to attend the council session, rose from her seat with visible effort. Her normally perfect academic composure was still shattered, and her voice trembled as she spoke. The Andromedian Institute confirms that human consciousness operates on principles that are incompatible with standard psychological analysis. Our most advanced scanning equipment was destroyed attempting to process their thought patterns. General Tharkon of the Dracorian Empire stood at attention and delivered his report with military precision, despite the fear that still haunted his yellow eyes. The Dracorian Defense Force has upgraded human classification to potential existential threat. Their military psychology includes tactical thinking that treats acceptable losses as mathematical variables. They live in a constant state of warfare preparation that would destroy the sanity of any normal species. Prime Alpha of the Nexus Collective transmitted its testimony through the Chamber's communication system since synthetic beings could not physically attend biological gatherings. Artificial intelligence analysis confirms that human mental processes contain logical paradoxes that threaten synthetic stability. Unit Alpha 7 remains quarantined due to corrupted programming caused by exposure to human consciousness. Elder Zarthan absorbed all of these testimonies while his ancient mind processed the implications of what they were describing. In 8 centuries of life, he had never encountered a species that could cause such widespread psychological distress simply by existing. Before we make any final determinations about humanity, I believe we should hear from the humans themselves. I have invited representatives of their species to explain their unique mental characteristics. A murmur of anxiety swept through the assembly as the chamber doors opened to admit 2 human figures. Captain Karen Miller entered first, wearing a dark blue uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps. She was a woman in her 40s, with gray-streaked hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around her without showing surprise or fear. Behind her walked Dr. Alex Foster, a tall man with brown hair and glasses who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the complexities of the human mind. Captain Miller moved to the center of the chamber and looked. Around it the gathered representatives of dozens of alien civilizations. She had been briefed on the various scanning incidents, but seeing the fear and confusion in so many different types of eyes was still surprising. Honored beings, I am Captain Karen Miller of the human diplomatic vessel USS Endeavor. With me is Dr. Alex Foster our foremost expert in human psychology and trauma studies. Dr. Foster stepped forward and addressed the assembly in a calm, professional voice that somehow managed to put the nervous aliens slightly at ease. Before I explain the nature of human consciousness, I want to assure you that we had no intention of causing distress to your researchers and analysts. We were not aware that our thought patterns could have such effects on other forms of intelligence. Elder Zarthan's crystalline form pulsed with curiosity. Dr. Foster, can you explain why human minds appear to contain what our experts describe as cognitive weapons or mental defenses? The truth is more complex and more simple than you might expect, Alex replied while activating a holographic display that showed images of Earth and human history. Humans evolved on what we have come to understand is an unusually dangerous planet. Earth is a world where survival required the ability to process extreme trauma while continuing to function normally. The holographic display showed scenes of natural disasters, predators, and environmental challenges that made several alien representatives step backward in shock. Hurricanes that could destroy entire cities, earthquakes that reshaped continents, volcanoes that could trigger global climate changes, and ice ages that lasted for thousands of years. Our planet taught us that life is fragile and that death is always present as a possibility, Alex continued. Unlike species that evolved in more stable environments, humans developed psychological mechanisms for accepting terrible realities while maintaining the hope and determination necessary for survival. Ambassador Vextar's telepathic abilities allowed him to sense the emotional weight behind Dr. Foster's words, and he shuddered as he realized that humans carried this knowledge as a normal part of their existence. You live with constant awareness of mortality and disaster, yet you continue to function normally? More than that, Captain Miller interjected. We use that knowledge as motivation to create, explore, and protect the things we value. Every human knows that they will die, that everyone they love will die, that their civilization might collapse, and that the universe is ultimately indifferent to their suffering. Yet we choose to find meaning and purpose in spite of these facts. Dr. Foster brought up new images showing human art, music, literature, and scientific achievements. We create beauty because we know it will not last forever. We explore space because we understand how small and alone we are in the universe. We form bonds with other people because we know that time is limited and precious. General Tharkon found his voice despite the fear that still gripped him. But your military personnel carry knowledge of violence and warfare that exceeds anything we have encountered. How do you maintain sanity while planning for such destructive scenarios? Human military training is designed to prepare us for the worst possible situations while maintaining our humanity, Captain Miller explained. We study warfare not because we enjoy violence, but because we know that sometimes fighting is necessary to protect innocent people. We calculate acceptable losses, not because we do not value life, but because we understand that refusing to make difficult decisions can result in even greater casualties. Dr. Foster added more context to her explanation. Every human soldier, sailor, or officer carries the psychological burden of knowing that their decisions might result in death and suffering. We train them to compartmentalize this knowledge so they can function effectively while still maintaining their moral connections to the people they are protecting. Dr. Kethara, who is still struggling with the memories of her scanning experience, asked the question that had been haunting her for months. How do you sleep at night knowing all of these terrible things about existence? Alex smiled sadly and gave an answer that would become part of galactic diplomatic records for centuries to come. We sleep because we have learned that consciousness itself is both a blessing and a curse. We carry the weight of existence not as a burden that crushes us, but as a responsibility that gives our lives meaning. We know that suffering is real, but we also know that love, creativity, and hope are equally real. Our species has discovered that the ability to acknowledge darkness makes it possible to truly appreciate light. Captain Miller added, "We face the harsh realities of existence, not because we are pessimistic, but because we have learned that only by accepting difficult truths can we make informed decisions about how to live meaningful lives." Prime Alpha transmitted a question through the communication system. Your consciousness contains logical paradoxes that threaten artificial intelligence stability. How do you function with contradictory beliefs and emotional responses that violate rational thinking? Dr. Foster laughed gently at the question. We have learned that pure logic is not sufficient for navigating the complexities of existence. Our emotions and intuitions provide information about our values and priorities that cannot be reduced to mathematical calculations. We embrace paradox and contradiction because reality itself is paradoxical and contradictory.